Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Intimacy in English, then you must like this video if you are visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Intimacy. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it all. Interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I'm going to tell you, I am also going to give you all the information on which Arte platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Intimacy is a 2001 erotic drama film directed by Patrice Chéreau from a screenplay he co-wrote with Anne-Louise Trividic, based on stories by Hanif Kureishi, who also wrote a novel of the same title. It stars Kerry and Mark Rylance. The film is an international co-production between France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Italy, featuring a soundtrack of pop songs from the 1970s and 1980s. Intimacy contains an unsimulated fellatio scene by Fox on Rylance. A French-dubbed version features voice actors Jean-Hugues Anglade and Nathalie Richard. The film has been associated with the new French extremity. Plot: Jay is a bartender who abandoned his family because his wife lost interest in him and their relationship. Now living alone in a decrepit house, he has intense weekly sex with a woman whose name he does not know. At first, their relationship is purely physical, but he develops an emotional attachment to her. Wanting to know more about her, Jay follows her across the streets of London to the grey suburbs where she lives. He then follows her to a pub theater where she is working as an actress in the evenings. Jay learns that her name is Claire, and she has a husband and a son. Subsequently, she makes it clear to Jay that she will not leave her family and won't see him anymore. Cast: Kerry as Claire, Mark Rylance as Jay, Susannah Harker as Susan, Jay's wife, Alastair Galbraith as Victor, Philippe Calvario as Ian, Timothy Spall as Andy, Claire's husband, Marianne Faithfull as Betty, Fraser Ayres as Dave, Michael Fitzgerald as bar owner, Robert Addy as bar owner, Rebecca Palmer as Pam, girl in squat. Reception: Intimacy was placed at 91 on Slant Magazine's Best Films of the 2000s. In a 2001 lengthy column for The Guardian, Alexander Linklater described the jealousy he experienced when his partner Kerry took the real sex role in this movie. Linklater concludes that he accepted the unsimulated oral scene, but he insists that the sexual intercourse is an illusion. Nevertheless, critics have declared its realist tendencies. Linda Williams, for instance, writes that Intimacy opens with urgent, hurried, and explicit penetrative sex. And Tanya Ksavinska writes that in this first scene, the spectator is left in little doubt that penetration has occurred. In a 2015 interview with the Wall Street Journal, Mark Rylance spoke of his experience on the film. At the time of the film's release, talk of the film's unsimulated sex scenes in tabloids added stress on his marriage. Rylance commented, "It soured me on my life 2 months. It's my mistake, but I felt Patrice Chéreau put undue pressure on me on set to do that. And at that point, I didn't have the confidence as a film actor to say no." Now, I think a lot of actors that people say are difficult are actually just being sensible. Awards: Intimacy won the Golden Bear for Best Film and the Silver Bear for Best Actress, Kerry at the Berlin Film Festival in 2001. Intimacy is a movie in which a man and a woman meet for short, brutal, anonymous sex every Wednesday afternoon. They want to keep it to that. No names, no small talk. After the screening at Sundance 2001, I ran into Christina Nordstrom, who runs the Women Filmmakers Symposium in Los Angeles. "Of course, no woman would be attracted to sex like that," she said. "Why not? The sex in the movie all involves the bottom of the ninth inning. A woman would be turned off by a man who doesn't spend time being tender and sweet and showing that he cares for her. There's no foreplay. She walks in, they rip off each other's clothes, and a few seconds later, they're in a frenzy. Any woman would know that this movie was directed by a man." A man might know that too. The film, which is brave but not perceptive, stars Mark Rylance as Jay, a former musician, a divorced husband and father, who now works as a barman and lives in a barely furnished hovel. In an early scene, he is angry about an assistant hired to work with him behind the bar because the new man is not a professional bartender but is an actor between jobs. The rage wells up because Jay fit that description himself until he left behind music 6 years ago and masochistically buried himself behind the bar. The woman is named Claire, Kerry Fox. How they met, we do not learn. At first, she's simply a woman who turns up at his door every Wednesday afternoon to relieve an urgent physical need. They tear off each other's clothes and have passionate sex on the floor of a messy room. Then they part. She is so single-minded that she courageously avoids the line, "We know every woman on earth would have eventually said, 'I could help you fix up this place.'" Their arrangement of raw sex begins to go wrong when he follows her one day. He discovers her real life as a housewife, mother, and actress who is playing Laura in a London Fringe theater production of The Glass Menagerie. A door in a pub is helpfully labeled Toilets in Theater. At one performance, he sits next to her husband, Andy, Timothy Spall, and son. Andy is a taxi driver, jovial with strangers. One day, Jay asks Andy, "What would you think of a mother who has it off on the sly and then goes back home in the evenings as if nothing has happened?" He wants Andy to know. He all but tells him about the affair. He reveals that he meets a woman every Wednesday afternoon. His eyes burn with intensity. Is Andy getting the message? Andy gets it, but keeps his thoughts to himself. Apparently, Jay needs more than anonymous sex. The film at first suggests that he wants contact, that he is dying of loneliness. But the material, based on stories by the London writer Hanif Kureishi, directed by Patrice Chéreau, tilts in a different direction. We see, I think, that what Jay really wants is revenge. Revenge against women and against a happy marriage. Much depends on what went on in Jay's failed marriage. We see him bathing his 2 small sons, looking like a doting father, and then his wife asks him if he loves them, and he is unable to answer. This may be the most important moment in the movie. If he did love them, would he enter Claire's personal life so violently? Would he attack their marriage, having met her own son? His anger toward women is terrifying. Andy, the taxi driver, has a surprising scene too, finally telling Claire what he really thinks of her. We find his issues revolve not around sex, but around honesty. And there are scenes at an amateur acting workshop Claire teaches, where the line between acting and reality is the real subject. It has not occurred to her, in the workshop or in life, that the point of acting is not to reproduce reality, but to improve upon it. Intimacy is a raw, wounding, powerfully acted film, and you cannot look away from it. Its flaws are honestly come by in the service of a failed search for truth. Its failure, I think, is an inability to look hard enough at what really drives Jay. His long, antagonistic relationship with a gay colleague might provide an answer, particularly since his taste for quick, anonymous sex seems to reflect a cruising sensibility. Does he hate women because his inability to accept his homosexuality forces him to use them as substitutes for the partners he would prefer? Only a theory, suggested but not proven by the film. But intimacy stays shy of any theory. It lets Jay off the hook, lets him retreat into the safe haven of loneliness and alienation. It should demand more of Jay, should insist on knowing him better. We leave the film with the conviction that the story is not over, that Jay is finished with Claire, but not with himself. Director-writer Patrice Chéreau, screenwriters Anne-Louise Trividic, based on the stories Intimacy and Nightlight by Hanif Kureishi, cinematographer Eric Gauthier, editor François Jedigier, music Eric Neveu, cast Mark Rylance, Jay, Kerry Fox, Claire, Timothy Spall, Andy, Alastair Galbraith, Victor, Philippe Calvario, Ian, Marianne Faithfull, Betty, Susannah Harker, Susan, Rebecca Palmer, Pam, Fraser Ayres, Dave. Runtime 119, Empire Pictures, 2001. It's a brave art film only because of its porno sex scenes, but it is not necessarily a perceptive one. Reviewed by Dennis Schwartz. French writer-director Patrice Chéreau's Intimacy is his first English-language film. It is anything but intimate, as it is mostly a graphically sexual pic. It's a darkly photographed encounter between 2 desperate and lonely middle-aged strangers. The slender, gaunt-faced and eyebrow-scarred Jay, Mark Rylance, and the full-figured Claire, Kerry Fox, who meet every Wednesday afternoon for sex in Jay's South London flat. They do no conversing. He doesn't even know her name and seems to care so little for her that he doesn't even shave the stubble off his beard until he goes to work. And we never learn how they met. The film follows in the footsteps of Bertolucci's Last Tango in Paris, but fails to get above its pornographic leanings. It's a brave art film only because of its porno sex scenes, but it is not necessarily a perceptive one. In one scene, the New Zealander Kerry has the Shakespearean actor's cock in her mouth. The sex act comes without foreplay or tenderness, and, I might add, the sex is not erotic. Only a man director could shoot a sex scene this way and think that it would be appealing to a woman. The film opens as the couple is first seen in the trendy Soho bartender Jay's dumpy flat, where they immediately rip off their clothes, touch each other all over their naked bodies, and only pause while he puts on a condom, a good advertisement for safe sex. They have sex while grunting, and after their afternoon quickie, she quietly leaves and disappears into London's crowded streets. The couple seems interesting only when naked and having sex. While dressed, they have nothing to say and give off bad vibes. This kind of anonymous sexual encounter happens for a few times, and we know nothing about Claire, but we observe that Jay is a bitter man who divorced his wife and left her with their 2 kids 6 years ago. Jay seems to be going nowhere. His dreams of being a musician no longer are realistic, as he puts everything into his occupation as head bartender. In one scene, he takes his anger out on a pretentious new gay bartender whom he contemptuously says wants to be an actor, the Frenchman Ian Philippe Calvario. He later on pours his heart out to him while searching for answers as to why his life is so empty. The banal advice he receives from his gay coworker is as useless as his used condom. Finally, out of curiosity, or in the bartender's tendency to screw up whatever he touches, he follows his mystery fuck by public transportation and learns that she's married, has a son, and is an actress appearing in a fringe basement theater located in a pub. She is in a production of Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. It is also apparent that she'll never make it as a professional actress because she lacks talent. Her husband is a colorful and amiable cab driver, Andy, Timothy Spall. He's the spitting image of the former American character actor Percy Helton, whom Jay accidentally meets at the theater and chats him up in the pub. Not satisfied to let things be, the nasty disposition of Jay takes hold, and he intimates in a sly, offhand manner that he's banging his wife. He can't stop his jealous harangue and does everything in his power to torment the affable cabbie, as he aims to ruin Andy's marriage as his was ruined. It seems that Jay really hates women. When Claire speaks to her confidant, an aspiring actress with no talent who is attending her acting night class, Betty, Marianne Faithfull, she confides that she died inside. We are to understand from this confessional, coming after her emotional crack-up during the class, that intimacy itself is dead. Unfortunately, the pic couldn't come up with a sound way to find closure for its slight story. It could have ended with Claire made aware that her theater acting was not as good a performance as when she was in bed with Jay. It could have ended when Andy rails into his wife for deceiving him, but it ended with Jay coming to the conclusion that he's a loser and someone who has nothing to say. In real life, such relationships come and go, and life goes on, as the affair will soon become a dim memory, and even the wild emotions of the moment will probably become tame in time. The performers take great risks. The handheld camera is unflinching. The physical contact is detailed. But where does it all lead? The unpleasant confrontational scenes and the background scenes showing the din of the busy London street traffic gave the film a reality of its own. Those downbeat scenes were the best scenes in the film. The cad, stuck in this glum environment, learns his lesson when he thinks he has fallen in love with someone he never knew. She was seeking some happiness from her unhappy marriage, and he was seeking comfort from his loneliness, and anything further couldn't be communicated as they both tried to buy a few moments of joy. But after the film establishes that sex can be broken down to some grunts, sighs, and lustful urges, in a film adapted from the stories by Hanif Qureshi, the emotional part of the story couldn't get an honest grip on itself. All the film succeeded in doing was blur the lines between acting and real life, as it ended in the same unspoken way it began. Both characters are unable to communicate with others because they don't understand their own actions. Though, the film gave it a nice try to say something more memorable, and it should, at least, be applauded for the effort. Alexander Linklater's article about how it felt to watch his girlfriend giving Mark Rylance a blowjob could not have been better timed. The disappointments of this season's Big Brother have left those broadsheet readers that have a taste for prurience desperate for something new to discuss. Linklater's long and thoughtful piece about his response to his partner's involvement in some of the most explicit sex scenes seen in mainstream cinema more than fulfills this remit. The indecent proposal-style dilemma at its heart has given everyone the chance to speculate ad infinitum about their own sexual boundaries. Interesting as this topic clearly is, it has rather overshadowed what should have been a more substantial debate. The real issue about intimacy's unprecedented portrayal of real sex for Linklater, the question of whether the scenes were artistically justified in the context of the film itself, is irrelevant. What matters is the broader artistic aim of bringing cinema closer to the truth about human relations. Not showing something runs counter to the instincts of cinema, says Linklater. He believes that nothing should be protected from the camera's probing gaze. If things are out of bounds, he says, then film is failing in its duty to be a voyeuristic eye that magnifies and heightens our own fleeting and confused experiences. It's fairly persuasive stuff, but I would dispute the contention that a scene involving a real erection is necessarily more honest than one that simply hints at its presence. In fact, I would go further and say that it is harder to make a truthful piece of film about sex when you're bent on showing everything than it is when you maintain a proper distance. This is because the fact of a sexual act is always going to overwhelm its context. However noble the director's intentions, the physiological impact of seeing a real penis takes the audience out of his narrative and makes them as immune as a Dirty Mac man at a peep show would be to any attempt to show them the meaning of what's taking place. As the French philosopher Baudrillard said in respect of Catherine Millet's erotic memoirs, obscenity is a wall that cannot be crossed. The truth of this maxim has been more than borne out by the media response to what publicists are insisting is a groundbreaking piece of cinema. So did she or didn't she? Wondered the Sunday Times at the top of a piece about Linklater's partner, Kerry Fox. The answer was pretty easy to establish. So, in a desperate effort to avoid discussing the actual movie, the interviewer asked her whether her co-star really had an orgasm. Well, who can blame her? Why should she resist this line of inquiry when her readers would clearly wish her to pursue it? No one is going to see intimacy because they're interested in the story of what a man does when he is released from the constraints of family life. To a man and woman, they'll be queuing for a look at Mark Rylance's penis. Respectable people they may be, but at this moment, they are no different from the flickering-eyed consumer of pornography who fast-forwards through the scene setting to get to the money shot. No doubt, Linklater would argue that this is only happening because nothing like it has ever been seen before. If he did, he'd be wrong. The reclamation of sex by pornography is something that will always happen. Far from freeing up the director to look into the gritty and dark realities of the subject, the graphic depiction of sexual acts will block any attempts he makes to artistically chart this terrain. The more he shows, the less he can hope to say. This equation, more than the convention, has informed most directors' reluctance to reveal all. The chances of achieving a high level of emotional reality are higher when they place more faith in the viewer's imagination. Linklater's claim that audiences cannot be convinced that sexual relations are taking place unless they actually see it is wrong-headed and bizarre. His suggestion that the implausibility of a film such as Boogie Nights was entirely due to the fact that it didn't show actual sex removes responsibility from the director. Boogie Nights was not believable because the director who made it had a glamorized view of the pornography industry. He would have done this whether or not Marky Mark was shown having actual sex, because the idea of attractive people taking cocaine and shagging is always going to be more seductive than any pseudo-moral message. The same problem will, I'm sure, hit the depiction of real sex in the movies. Although, at the moment, the practice is sanctioned only for boring, earnest films, such as The Idiots or Romance. Both protected themselves against the charge of peddling pornography by making sure that the sex they showed was dismal and depressing. How long will it be before jollier directors decide that it's time to give happy, sexy sex a look in? If the current trajectory isn't arrested, within a few years, the po-faced pursuit of real, as in non-sexy, sex will be confined to just a few directors, while the rest of them get on with the more lucrative and infinitely more enjoyable business of making multi-million-dollar shagfests. And then, where will we be? Directed by Patrice Chéreau, Patrice Chéreau's controversial new film Intimacy begins with 35 minutes of graphic sex. Claire, brilliantly played by Kerry arrives uninvited on her free Wednesday afternoon, knocks, and enters a squalid house flat belonging to J, Mark Rylance. Puzzled, he asks, "Was this agreed?" Apparently not, but without another word they proceed to have sex, at her initiative, on the floor. Their frenzied passion is repeated on subsequent Wednesday afternoons until Jay makes the mistake of trying to find out who Claire really is. And then the spell is broken. People who expected erotica were disappointed. Roger Ebert, the dean of popular film criticism, describes the opening as short, brutal, anonymous sex. Ebert expresses distaste and reports the dismissive judgment of Christine Nordstrom, director of the Women Filmmakers Symposium of Los Angeles. "No woman would be attracted to sex like that," she opined. Nordstrom's premise is that the typical male director projects his slam-bam thank you ma'am sexual fantasies onto the screen, where a woman's desires are presented as a gratifying mirror image of what men want. In Intimacy, Claire walks in, they rip off each other's clothes, and a few seconds later, they're in a frenzy. Nordstrom concluded that any woman would know that this movie was directed by a man. Although I think the feminist criticism misses everything interesting and important about Intimacy, Ebert and Nordstrom's reaction to the opening scene was typical. Most critics were not turned on by watching a man and woman who are determined to give and get everything they can out of the sexual encounter. And not for want of realism. The two actors, he is thin and balding, she is more attractive, but not a conventional beauty, and both are pushing 40, are the ones having sex. Chéreau films them in semi-darkness, so I cannot attest that every sexual act that seemed to take place actually was consummated, but one episode unmistakably shows Kerry with Mark Rylance's penis in her mouth. Chacun a son goût, but most people will find Intimacy's graphic display of sex and nudity neither beautifully erotic nor excitingly pornographic. But it is as real as Chéreau means it to be. And real sex can be disturbing. For me, it was like being trapped in a room where I felt more like an uncomfortable intruder rather than an aroused voyeur. Chéreau is a serious and sophisticated artist who has directed theater and opera as well as film. He has also been around long enough to understand what turns people on. One can assume he knows that many women, as Nordstrom asserts, prefer a man who spends time being tender and sweet and showing that he cares for her. But his ambitions were artistic, not erotic. Chéreau was confronting our sexuality, exploring its disruptive power, not trying to arouse either the men or the women in the audience. Critics have compared Chéreau's Intimacy to Bertolucci's 1972 Last Tango in Paris. The comparisons are prompted by obvious similarities. In Last Tango, Marlon Brando meets Maria Schneider when they are both looking to rent the same empty Paris apartment. Total strangers, they meet and almost immediately have sex against a wall in an empty room. The sexual connection works for them, and both experience a kind of liberation. They return to the empty flat to perform every sexual act they, or perhaps we, have imagined. The relationship ends when Brando, an older man in the film, proposes marriage to Schneider. But the audience sees nothing graphic, everything is suggested. And although the sex is short, brutal, and anonymous, Pauline Kael was not alone in describing it as the erotic bombshell of its time. But times and sexual mores change. In the current culture, sex is more obsession than liberation. kids watch faux pornography on MTV, Cosmo readers learn that proficiency in oral sex is the foundation of a happy marriage. For men, sex is often seen as a matter of performance, and with Viagra, the show never ends. Chéreau believes that in some important sense, even class struggle has moved inside the body and become sexualized. It is the new millennium struggle of all against all for sexual power. Obsessive sex offers no liberation, but only repetition and the search for new aphrodisiac rituals, new partners, and new limit experiences. It is this desperate sexuality, isolating people rather than connecting them, that ultimately intrigues Chéreau. His film is more questioning, more troubled, more relevant to our times than Bertolucci's sultry, wish-fulfilling tango dream. Hanif Kureishi, whose recent fiction was the basis of the screenplay for Intimacy, has written an illuminating essay about his collaboration with Chéreau. It all started when Chéreau, like Claire, knocked on the door one day. Although Kureishi does not mention it, Chéreau may have come to him because of Kureishi's early fame and Oscar nomination for the screenplay of My Beautiful Laundrette, another erotic bombshell in its day. The story is about two beautiful young men, one English, Daniel Day-Lewis, the other Pakistani, Gordon Warwicky, who have a West Side Story love affair in a lower-class London community. It is the kind of neighborhood where, after a few pints at the pub, the xenophobic skinheads go out for some pocky bashing, and it is Daniel Day-Lewis, publicly and unrestrainedly kissing his Pakistani lover, that transforms cross-racial hostility into its erotic counterpart. Pauline Kael marveled at what she experienced as My Beautiful Laundrette's thrills of perilous display. In his essay on the making of Intimacy, Kureishi notes that what was shocking in the 1980s is now commonplace. You cannot turn on the television in London without seeing boys snogging, particularly on the sports channels. Kureishi seems to want us to know that he is straight, in contrast to his collaborator Patrice Chéreau, a gay French man. Whatever his own sexual preferences may be, Kureishi has a fertile sexual imagination. In his early days, he wrote pseudonymous pornography, along with some plays in My Beautiful Laundrette. Chéreau's original idea was to collaborate on a cinematic version of Kureishi's novel, Intimacy, which describes a man's reaction to his divorce. But after much brainstorming, Chéreau decided to base his film on a recent Kureishi short story about a man and a woman whose only connection is that they meet for sex on Wednesday afternoons. Chéreau also used bits from the novel. Rylance's character is recently divorced, and from other Kureishi short stories, but decided ultimately to have his own screenwriter, a French woman, write the screenplay. Only the title of the projected film remained unchanged. Kureishi's description of his collaboration with Chéreau sounds like someone trying to have the last word about a relationship. One can imagine these two men circling around each other, their creative narcissism at risk, testing to see who would be dominant, who would give, and who would take. In the end, Kureishi's account suggests that Chéreau took what he wanted and went his own creative way. Chéreau invited Kureishi to the penultimate screening of The Rushes and expressed little interest in editorial input. One can understand why Kureishi compares the collaboration to the affair. Chéreau did use him. Though Chéreau has made collaborative films in different European countries, one in Germany and now this one in England, Intimacy is his film, animated by his French sensibilities, despite its London setting and British actors. According to Kureishi, Patrice seemed interested in the power of impersonal sexuality, in passion without relationship, in the way people can be narcissistically fascinated by one another's bodies and their own sexual pleasure, while keeping away strong feeling and emotional complexity. Patrice and I talked about keeping the camera close to the bodies, not overlighting them, or making them look pornographically enticing or idealized. The point is to look at how difficult sex is, how terrifying, and what a darkness and obscenity our pleasures can be. This approach to sex comes from Freud, not Sigmund, but his grandson Lucien, the painter whose hyper-realistic aesthetic Chéreau avowedly adopted for his film. One need only look at some of Lucien Freud's early nudes to understand Chéreau's interest. The Freud painting on display in the new Tate Modern's exhibition of nudes is an amazing achievement. A woman's naked body is fully revealed, but entirely without erotic suggestion. It is as though the artist has stepped out of social reality and all its erotic baggage to see and reveal the thing in itself. Like Chéreau's film, Freud's nudes are arresting without being alluring. Roger Ebert, to his credit, acknowledged that he may have missed something about intimacy by relying on the barometer of his sexual arousal. He admitted to being puzzled about the psychology of Jay, the head barman in a busy London club. He speculates that Jay's bitterness at the world may express repressed homosexual impulses. Ebert, I think, is listening to the wrong Freud. Jay is the new millennium Londoner, the kind of man who has seen and done everything. His bitterness reflects a lack of purpose, not repression. Jay is played by Mark Rylance, whom I first saw as Hamlet in a Royal Shakespeare production on American tour. His Hamlet was truly melancholic, and he wore pajamas like an invalid. In performances in England, he reportedly mooned Polonius. This is a man who is easy with nudity. He is also a superb actor, and now the artistic director of the Globe Theatre, built on London's South Bank as a replica of the original venue for Shakespeare's plays. Recently, I saw Rylance there as the lead in Shakespeare's seldom-performed Cymbeline. An elegant and gracious stage presence, he has formidable talent and an enchanting voice. He rarely makes films, but he was convinced by Chéreau's project and put his reputation and his naked body on the line. His character, Jay, is something of a control freak and becomes furious when the club management, without consulting him, hires a gay Frenchman as a jibber, despite his ignorance about the work. These two characters' jabber suggest Qureshi and Chéreau. In a subplot, Jay will eventually come to accept and befriend the gay Frenchman, who seems unusually jabber about people's problems. If this is not Chéreau's commentary on his collaboration with Qureshi, then the jabber will seem gratuitous. Jibber, once a struggling musician trying to make it in a band, has now settled for less. He is on speaking terms with his former wife and seems to love his two sons, but he is obviously a narcissist, preoccupied with Jibber and with sex. Chéreau makes this point inescapable in a scene when Jay spends time at his jabber home looking after the kids. After bathing the boys and being a good parent, he unexpectedly jibber to his ex-wife's bureau and fondles her underwear. Selecting a pair, he jabber it to the bathroom and masturbates while sniffing it. Chéreau's cinematography in this scene is cautious and far from explicit. Still, there is no jabber what Jay is doing, and no question about the point, particularly when one of Jay's young sons barges into the bathroom and almost catches his father in the act. Isolating and narcissistic sex is erupting into everyday family life, jabber the bastion of sentimental connectedness. All the children in the film are angels whose innocent faith in their parents is gibber by the darkness and obscenity of sexuality. Jibber, only son, is one of those threatened angels. He worships his mother, who is married to a crude, obese, but seemingly benign jabber driver, Timothy Spall. Claire has jibber that sex has passed out of her life, but she wants to preserve the security of her marriage and the illusions of domesticity. Apparently, she has run into Jay at his bar and experienced an unexpected jabber. She gambles that he will make her catch fire again, and he does. Claire does not want intimacy of the mind, only jabber of the body. The first 35 minutes demonstrate what jabber wants, and the rest of the film shows us how it ruins her life. Jay, ever the control freak, follows her across London to learn her identity and discovers that she is a so-so actress who is starring in a production of Jabber, William's Glass Menagerie, performed in a theater in the basement of a pub. Jibber to Claire, Jay meets her husband and son. The boy attends all of his mother's performances and, starry-eyed with love, jabber Jay that his mother gets better every night. We have seen the sexual realities of Claire's life. Now Chéreau gives us the adoring son, the doting, supportive husband, and the aspiring actress mother, all gibber in a facade of sentimental family life. We know Jay has the power to destroy that facade, and when the anonymity is lost and the affair ends, he continues to stalk Claire's family, hinting about the affair to her husband and son, driven on by his jabber rage. Timothy Spall, who plays Claire's husband, the taxi driver, is a talented jabber with surprising range. He played a benevolent photographer in Mike Leigh's Secret and Lies, the Mikado in Topsy-Turvy, and here he is a menacing jabber under a surface of bonhomie. he will explode in an unforgettable scene of rage against his wife and jabber of shattering hatred. Chéreau filmed this scene with Claire sitting in the back seat of her husband's cab as he jabber her. Not a blow is struck, but this is jabber domestic violence. Kerry Gibber, extraordinary performance as Claire, earned her Best Actress at the Berlin Film Festival. Gibber's loss is clear, but to underline Jay's predicament, Chéreau gives him a one-night stand, this time with an attractive young woman who babbles away during the sexual act, sending Jay out the door with a new sense of the loneliness of the narcissist. No Frenchman of Gibber age and education could title his film Intimacy without thinking of Sartre. Sartre jabber if human intimacy was even possible, and Chéreau explores that idea through sex in a way that Sartre might relish. Is sex the ultimate jabber of human intimacy, or is that idea itself just bad faith sentimentality? Gibber answers that question with 35 minutes of desperate sex between people who are strangers to each other. People who cling to the reef of solipsism, to use Sartre's telling phrase, as their aphrodisiac. It is a jabber and paradoxical commentary on the human condition. The dream of Gibber is to be fully known and accepted by the other. If that is what we wish for, then Chéreau's jabber is our nightmare. Intimacy is a rare achievement, a film of ideas that intrigue and jabber us. Intimacy is a movie that is notorious for its real, unsimulated sex scenes. It's starring Mark Rylance, a recent Oscar winner for Bridge of Spies, and Kerry Fox, a person who has given an on-screen blowjob to an Oscar winner. It's also got an excellent soundtrack, and as far as I'm concerned, any movie that opens with hardcore Hollywood sex and London Calling by The Clash is fine by me, and quite indicative of a good time to come. Jay and Claire, Rylance and Fox, have an entirely physical relationship. They are cheating on their significant others with each other, trying desperately to bring a little joy into their otherwise unhappy lives. Their marriages are loveless and, in Jay's case, generally over. In each other, they find an outlet for no-strings-attached sex, enabling them to escape from the monotony of their lives once a week when they meet each other in an apartment Jay has leased. Their sex scenes are almost completely silent, with no real passion to speak of. However, after Claire misses one of their weekly meetings, Jay decides to follow her and find out more about her life. He meets her husband, a generally good man who is perhaps not a great fit for her, and her son. He discovers that Claire is an aspiring actress who runs a theater troupe and that her family is completely and wholeheartedly supportive of her. He realizes very quickly that he has feelings for her and apparently decides that the best way to approach the situation is by befriending her husband, playing a deceitful cat-and-mouse game in an effort to become a part of her life. Rylance and Fox are truly excellent in this film, and they turn what could have been a drab, boring indie drama into a fantastic film that delves into the dark side of lives unfulfilled. Rylance's character Jay is a failed musician who has left his wife and children, seeking the comfort of friends who are more interested in their own lives, and a woman who is using him as an escape as much as he's using her. Even in other sexual relationships that he seeks, he is unable to get his mind off of the woman he has grown to love, at least to the extent that he's capable of the emotion. He's selfish, boring, and practically unlovable. Fox's Claire, on the other hand, lives an equally sad life. Her supportive family is not able to help her to achieve her goals. Her husband is a disappointing rube, her child the only person in her life that truly appreciates her for what she is. But like Jay, she's selfish. She chooses to spend her time with Jay, as she is incapable of finding happiness with the people that are already in her life. It's a depressing film, to be sure, and one that we know strikes a chord for many in the audience. At what point do we have a right to happiness, and at what expense to those around us? When must we accept the hands that life has dealt us, either through happenstance or our own choices, and at what points do we have the right or responsibility to change these things? These questions are addressed, and like the characters in the film, we're left with few answers. The people we feel bad for are the victims in these two people's search for contentment. Jay's family is devastated, with his wife at one point asking him if he even loves his kids, while Claire's husband, a truly sympathetic character who doesn't deserve what is coming to him, is clearly doing the best he can and it's never enough. It's just sad, really, knowing that there are people in this world living this experience on a daily basis and knowing that it so rarely works out in any quantifiable way. Rylance and Fox execute director Patrice Chéreau's vision perfectly, providing for us a window into a world we have absolutely no desire to be a part of. And ultimately, we learn the true meaning of intimacy in relation to the film's characters. It's something that they, try as they might, will never have with each other. Who this movie is for: indie drama fans, new French extremity lovers, romantic nihilists. Bottom line, it's devastating, brilliant, and remarkably beautiful. Another that could be categorized as new French extremity, Rylance and Fox give outstanding performances, and Patrice Chéreau has created a truly outstanding film. This one comes highly recommended and is well worth the watch for anyone that doesn't mind the subtitles. Like one of its two major characters, the drama Intimacy would like to start up a rather involved discussion, but unfortunately, the sex keeps getting in the way. And let's set something straight in a hurry. The sex scenes in this downbeat character piece are as graphic as any that have ever been seen in legitimate cinema. In fact, it's debatable whether all of the sexual contact between actors in this film can be called simulated, which explains why it was banned in at least one European country. Consequently, the film has been released by its distributor without an MPAA rating, which means that nothing has been left out for its current U.S. theatrical run. To be fair to the film, it should be noted that there seems to be a point to the explicit content. It's evidently intended to show a more realistic, less glamorous version of an adulterous relationship. However, as valid that point might be, there's no reason for filmmaker Patrice Chéreau to go quite so far. And unfortunately, the sexual content diverts attention away from what is some very powerful acting by the film's talented cast. Intimacy is a somewhat ironic title. Though divorced bartender J, Mark Rylance, is having an affair with married Claire, Kerry Fox, it's under what is possibly the least intimate of circumstances. The two of them begin meeting weekly in his fairly grungy apartment, but have little interaction with each other, aside from sex. That's fine with Claire, who's not looking for anything more than a purely physical relationship, but it's a bit disturbing to Jay. So he begins following her around town in an attempt to get to know her better, despite the fact that such a move could anger Claire and cause her to discontinue their affair. Few comments. In the film's second half, Chéreau and co-screenwriter Anne-Louise Trividic attempt to flesh out, so to speak, the story with subplots about one of Jay's friends and one of his co-workers, as well as Claire's husband, British character actor Timothy Spall. But all it does is show how much better the film might have been if it hadn't focused so much on the tawdry sexual relationship. Still, there's no denying how strong the performances are by Fox, and especially Rylance, who deserves credit for taking on such a bold role. Intimacy is not rated, but would certainly receive an NC-17 for its graphic depiction of sex, which again may not be accurately termed simulated. Full male and female nudity, frequent use of strong sexually related profanity, crude sexual slang terms and references, simulated drug use, cocaine, and brief violence, a party tussle. Exactly how the Netflix algorithm delivered the Spanish drama Intimacy to me just as I had a few hours to spare, I don't know. I'm just grateful it did. It's extraordinarily good television, as compelling as anything I've seen this year, as well as topical, brave, and honest as it confronts difficult but critical issues facing women in contemporary society. The story focuses on the devastation wrought in the lives of two women by the violations of their privacy through the distribution of photos and videos of them engaged in sexual activity. The first is Malin, the deputy mayor of Bilbao, whose shaming is public as footage of her having sex on a beach with a man who is not her husband is broadcast on the mainstream and social media. The second is Anne, a factory worker who suffers when footage of her is sent around men at her workplace. Malin, strong, driven, and partially at least supported, fights for her political life and the chance to achieve her ambition to become mayor. Anne, who holds her secretly privately until it's too much, takes her own life. Intimacy then tells the story of Malin's struggle for survival in a Machiavellian, male-dominated political environment and the search for justice for Anne, driven by her sister Begonia. If the power and intensity of the performances of both Itziar Ituño as Malin and Patricia Lopez Arnaiz as Bego could be captured as energy, climate change could be halted in an instant. Bego, a quiet schoolteacher thrust into an unimaginable situation, spends perhaps half her time on the screen in tears. And as much as there is sadness for her lost sister in those tears, there is also vast wells of anger and frustration, as well as incredible strength. At times, it was hard to watch her, but harder still to stop. And in Malin, we see an indomitable will and the heart of a lioness, combined with razor-sharp political instincts as she fights first for herself and then for her family, as her perfidious allies and unscrupulous enemies seek to use her public shaming to unseat. I am sure these two will both be in the frame come award season, but the nominees from this series alone could provide another 3. Despite announcing her own death in the opening scene, Anne's story is told through a series of flashbacks in a harrowing performance from Veronica Echegui, whose life unravels as she deals alone with her own sense of shame and guilt. Then there is Yune Nogueras as Malin's daughter Leire, who struggles to cope with the fallout of her mother's public humiliation. And then Emma Suarez as Alicia, the cop charged with investigating both cases, who is also dealing with her own demons. These are 5 phenomenal performances. Intimacy is part political drama, part police drama, and part domestic drama. Ultimately, it is a story about guilt and blame. Malin, Bego, Anne, and Leire are victims, and yet the system, the media, the public, and even their friends and family are quick to blame and shame them. And such is the shape of the world we live in, each blames themselves for some element of their situation. And in the background, the men who are responsible deflect, dissemble, conspire, and commit crime without the slightest compunction. Theirs is the world, and they act accordingly. Intimacy follows Unbelievable as a Netflix drama that takes on complex issues with intelligence and subtlety and lays bare the fault lines in our society. With incomparable acting, sharp writing, and imaginative cinematography, it delivers a powerful and emotional package. See the trailer here. In milliseconds, your private life stops being private and becomes public. Someone presses a button, causing an unrestrained hurricane to erupt. And like an epidemic, your privacy spreads from screen to screen at an incredible rate. Creator Veronica Fernandez sounded rather dramatic while describing Netflix's latest Spanish original Intimacy, but with everything from fatal car accidents and near-fatal diving board jumps to GBH counts and gun-toting chases caused by the ripple effect of a leaked sex tape, the politically and socially conscious tale more than justifies such disastrous talk. It's the question on everyone's lips once the world of married rising politician Malin, Itziar Ituño, collapses with a single click in the opening episode. Who uploaded the secretly filmed beachside tryst that essentially turned the evening news into soft porn? The man whose face is hidden in the clip, Cesar Eduardo Loveras, was the initial suspect. And although the cash-strapped son of Bilbao's business overlord did indeed help to set the honey trap, he only intended to use the footage for blackmail purposes. In the finale, we learn that Cesar didn't initially set out to make money out of his extramarital affair. It was only when a lackey of another powerful businessman spotted the two lovebirds getting cozy at a restaurant that a plan to besmirch Malin's name came together. Andoni Sigurola, Michael Tello, had harbored a grudge against the aspiring mayor ever since she announced plans to further regulate the real estate market. Turning her into the city's answer to Paris Hilton was his ultimate form of revenge. And he wasn't sorry either. Sigurola's cockiness subsided, though, when no-nonsense Inspector Alicia, Anna Wagoner, threatened him with some serious jail time. It had already been determined that injuries sustained from a vicious beating had caused Cesar to drive off a hillside to his death back in episode 3. But we didn't know who was responsible for the broad daylight attack until the real estate magnate, a surprisingly pivotal figure considering he was only briefly introduced in the penultimate episode, squealed. According to the chauvinist, he'd sent 2 of his security workers to politely renegotiate with Cesar over payment for the sex tape. But things got out of hand, and the henchman decided to beat him to a pulp on a patch of industrial wasteland instead. Do Malin and Alfredo get back together? Well, the fact that they're last seen cuddling in bed together suggests yes. Of course, news of Malin's sexual exploits didn't come as a surprise to Alfredo, Mark Martinez. The pair had an open marriage after all, albeit one that appeared to be completely falling apart. And Alfredo knew that his wife had used their holiday home to fulfill her needs before the tape got out. But concerned with the fact that the public would see him as a cuckold, Alfredo still acted every inch the wounded party, constantly giving Malin short shrift, despite the fact that she was entirely innocent of any wrongdoing. Luckily, he eventually managed to see the error of his ways, and in the finale reveals that he was only lashing out because of societal expectations. In the end, all the drama appears to have brought the once distant couple closer together. Who leaked the other sex tape? Sadly, Malin wasn't intimacy's only revenge porn victim. As shown in the very first scene, Anne Veronica Echegui tragically drowns herself after uncompromising videos circulating around her factory workplace make life untenable. Sister Bego, Patricia Lopez Arnay, subsequently makes it her mission to track down those responsible for both leaking and passing on the sex club footage. And thanks to the help of Alicia, it's discovered that John, Mikel Losada, the old boyfriend that's seen in flashback harassing Aine on her doorstep, was the culprit. Malin's lawyer father reveals that a prison sentence of 2 to 5 years awaits and that Aine's guilty colleagues will be fined and fired. Bego, meanwhile, takes on a new job, supporting women who've gone through similar ordeals. What happened to Lair? After being shamed at school for her mother Malin's leaked sex tape scandal, unruly teenager Lara, Yune Nogueras, then finds herself at the center of her own thanks to weaselly ex-boyfriend Xabi, Arnaz Portas. In retaliation for uploading intimate footage, Lair physically assaults Xabi, resulting in a charge of grievous bodily harm. But after showing remorse, and with the mitigating circumstances, the judge accepts the defense's argument that a fine and community service is punishment enough. What happened to Malin's political ambitions? Malin goes through quite the political roller coaster in the 8th and final episode as the tide of public opinion slowly begins to turn. At the start, she's hanging on to her position by a thread, and when her sexist male colleagues start to take credit for her bravery in facing the scandal head-on, she understandably tells them where to go. But Malin soon has second thoughts about returning to her former job as a lawyer. Firstly, she sees the groundswell of support on leaving the city hall. She's then left feeling helpless and ashamed when a victim of sexual harassment she once helped to discredit tells her to stick her advice. And then her political party practically begs her to run for mayor after their other main candidate, Gorka, Inigo Aramburu, resigns. It's quickly revealed that Malin's right-hand man, Hugo, Francesco Carril, blackmailed their rival over his escort habit. The closing shot of Malin putting up campaign posters proves that she's now back in the game and perhaps ready for a second season too. Intimacy is streaming now on Netflix. Check out our Drama Hub for all the latest news. If you're looking for something to watch tonight, check out our TV guide. The latest issue of Radio Times magazine is on sale now. Subscribe now and get the next 12 issues for only £1. For more from the biggest stars in TV, listen to the Radio Times podcast with Jane Garvey, directed by the late Patrice Chéreau, Queen Margot, Persecution, Gabrielle, and adapted from stories by Hanif Kureishi, My Beautiful Laundrette. 2001's London set Intimacy is a grim, downbeat tale of the human obsession with sex and both our failure and need to connect through it. The film follows Jay, a failed London musician who meets once a week with Claire, a woman he barely knows, for a series of intense sexual encounters. But when Jay actually reaches out and begins asking the usual kind of relationship questions about her, it throws their heady and casual union into stark relief. Is it possible to have continued sex without real intimacy? It's a fraught question, and it gives this confronting film its inherent kick. Giving it an even weightier kick are the highly explicit, wholly non-titillating sex scenes that punctuate its gloomy but affecting narrative. The dialogue is unusually candid and eloquent, and the emotions effectively stoked, but these are the moments that mark the film. With Mark Rylance's ascendance in the international film industry, the terse, grittily poetic, and bleakly honest Intimacy might now be known for something more than the controversy that it generated upon its release. All of which seems so ridiculous now, particularly considering the response that the film received from Kerry Fox's friends and family. I was really nervous that my best friend would be critical of it, but she really loved it, the actress told Film Inc. My sisters have seen it, and my mother, but my father didn't think that I wanted him to see it, so he didn't go. I was waiting for him to say something about it, but my mother just said, "That's nothing to be shocked about." Patrice Chéreau is good on flesh. He understands its hues, its texture, its hideous vulnerability. His 1994 film, La Reine Margot, conveyed the sanguinary horrors of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre by focusing intently on the color of corpses, a lurid pallor. His cinematographer, Philippe Rousselot, had apparently lifted straight from medieval religious painting. Chéreau's last film, Those Who Love Me Can Take the Train, caught the black-eyed, funereal pastiness of a party of mourners on a train, where the bluish light casts a shadow of mortality on everyone's skin. The first thing we see in Intimacy, his latest, is a tangle of flesh that seems to be two bodies entwined on the floor. But no, it resolves itself into the single body of a man twisted in a posture of sleep, like one of Sheila's agonized studies of the human figure. The camera surveys his half-clothed form and asks us to consider the pitiful yet defiant attitude of his pale limbs, the flesh and muscle untrimmed by exercise. It announces, he is alone after all. We will become quite familiar with this body over the next couple of hours. It belongs to a 30-something man named J, Mark Rylance, divorced father of two, head barman, malcontent, and possibly a bit of a jerk. Every Wednesday in the afternoon, a 30-something woman named Claire, Kerry Fox, comes to his flat in southeast London, and within minutes they grapple each other to the floor, tear off their clothes, and go at it. The candor of these sex scenes has already made Intimacy notorious. The press screening was as packed as I've ever seen, and I couldn't help noticing that at least half of the critics there were not in attendance at the earlier showing of Dr. Dolittle 2. Did they get what they came for, I wonder? The frisson of actual sex on screen will not startle anyone who has seen a porn movie, but there are marked differences here. Rylance and Fox are fairly well-known actors, for one thing, and at the level of mere gossip, it stirs up all sorts of speculation. Did the actors' partners know, for instance, exactly the nature of the intimacy the film required? When she fellets him, was it precisely orchestrated, or did she just go for it, as it were, willy-nilly? And so, pruriently, on, this relates to the larger difficulty of context. In pornography, the real and the make-believe rub along quite happily. The ridiculous fakery of the plots is decoration to the bare documenting of the sex. Those bodies actually did what you see them doing. In mainstream drama, however, the documentary element is disruptive, hauling the viewer outside the boundaries of fiction. A tacit contract between audience and actor has been breached. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh, but a bobbing erection is a problem. The time may come when we won't even blink at the sight of penetration on screen, but that time isn't now. The irony of it all is that the sex scenes between Rylance and Fox have a fleshy realism and an urgency which the rest of the movie conspicuously lacks. Chéreau, adapting from two stories by Hanif Kureishi, wants to show sex as an expression of the character's drives, how the act can be a conversation, or a furious row, or a farewell. It's what happens outside of their intense couplings that makes Intimacy feel clogged, and at its worst, completely artificial. Nor does it help that Chéreau and Kerry write dialogue that no human being in the world would ever utter. On the periphery, we get disjointed sallies from Jay's friends, whether the drug-addled sad sack, Alastair Galbraith, who shouts and sweats a lot, or the gay French barman, Philippe Calvario, who fancies himself as a philosopher. Even less comprehensible is Marianne Faithfull in the role of Claire's confidant, who serves up bag lady gibberish by the square yard. Visually, this movie offers something truthful in its portrait of erotic passion, and certain details, the reddening bloom on Carrie Fox's face, the scar bisecting Mark Rylance's eyebrow, may even outlast the more controversial images of carnality. As an account of spiritual estrangement, however, or the failure of love, or the precarious state of modern marriage, or whatever else it thinks it is, you're not missing a great deal. Chapter 1 discusses the film Intimacy as constructed discursively from two entirely different perspectives. A film reviewer's intertextual references and professional organization of knowledge in constructing for his readers a negative view of the film, and the author's no less intertextual, no less constructed, interdisciplinary overlapping of frames, interpreting intimacy by way of a mutual understanding between and a galvanizing extension of disciplinary assumptions. In this analysis, the narrative is explored via the relationship of three milieus: the sex scenes of Jay and Claire, the social world of South London beyond Jay's flat, where this sex takes place, and Jay's own personal memory space. The tension and balance between language and silence, explored between and within these scenes, reveal the film's exploration of modern intimacy at a time when sex for reproduction, marriage, and romantic love are under constant renegotiation. Intimacy is a sex drama that starts off with two anonymous lovers meeting in the basement of a London flat. They have sex without much intimacy and go their separate ways. Eventually, the movie reveals that the man, Jay, is a bartender who once had a family. His wife asked him if he loved his two precious children, but he was too self-absorbed to love anybody. Jay follows his silent paramour and learns that the woman, Claire, is married with a son. Jay is shattered. He thought there may have been something about himself that was worthy loving, rather than just using for sex. Eventually, he confronts Claire. Then, her husband confronts her, and the acting class goes on and on. In spite of the vivid sex scenes, there's not much passion in Intimacy. Instead of involving the audience, it is more of a mediocre attempt to play some scenes by a group of people trying to copy Lee Strasberg's famous method acting technique. Like Strasberg, they have no concern for the spiritual side of life. Instead, they are into the body and body language. Needless to say, these people need Jesus Christ. Extreme humanist worldview, which reduces people to animals in heat, 77 obscenities and 5 profanities, sexual violence and threat of violence, several scenes of blatant fornication, oral sex and adultery, full male and female nudity, extreme drinking, cocaine and other drug use, including drug den, and lying, cheating, and vicious attitudes. Once upon a time, when my father was acting on Broadway, my wife and I took lessons from Lee Strasberg, arguably the premier acting teacher in the world, at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute in New York City. Lee was instrumental in making method acting a household word. Part of his process was getting you in touch with your feelings. I quickly realized that if you got too much in touch with your feelings, it would destroy your marriage. Lee would sometimes intimidate people, have them strip in front of a class, and act out a romantic scene. Intimacy reminds me of the worst parts of the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, which, by the way, produced some great actors. It starts off with a very X-rated sex scene. The two characters in the basement of the London flat are nameless. They have sex without much intimacy and go their separate ways. Eventually, the movie reveals that the man Jay is a bartender. Jay once had a family with 2 precious children. His wife asked him if he loved his children, but he was too self-absorbed to love anybody. Now, Jay tends bar at a high-class bar. Jay follows his liaison one day after their tryst, and it turns out that she is a small-time actress in a cubbyhole theater beneath a pub. The story reveals that the woman, Claire, has a husband and a son. Claire visits Jay once a week on Wednesdays to fornicate. Jay is shattered. He thought there may have been something about himself that was worthy loving rather than just using for sex. Eventually, he confronts Claire. Then, her husband confronts her, and the acting class goes on and on. In spite of the vivid sex scenes, there's not much passion in this movie. Instead of involving the audience, it is more of a mediocre attempt to play some scenes by a group of people who are trying to copy Lee Strasberg's famous technique. Like Strasberg, they have no concern for the spiritual side of life. They are into the body and body language. It is an exercise in adultery which seems vain and futile. Needless to say, these people need Jesus Christ. I was just on the set of another movie being directed by a Christian called Gods and Generals, a movie about the Civil War being released next year. One of the secular reporters mentioned that the most powerful romantic scene he's ever seen was the prayer between Stonewall Jackson and his wife. Now, there's a concept: real intimacy. Even a secular reporter could recognize that this prayer was touching something much deeper than mere body language. July 19, 2001. I got my first serious taste of jealousy when I was 18. Just like falling in love, first-time jealousy plunges you deeper into yourself and is harder to comprehend than any sexual experience that will follow in a lifetime. It is unrepeatable. But of all animal emotions, jealousy is the purest excruciation. It is the knowledge of nearly possessing what you desire most on earth, then watching as someone else enjoys it instead of you. The watching is important, whether real or imagined, because jealousy works its cleverest tricks with visual distortions. In Shakespeare's Winter's Tale, the king, Leontes, sees things which are not there. He sees his wife doing things she is not doing. He plans to kill his best friend, who in fact has done nothing wrong with his wife. But as Leontes hisses, is whispering nothing, is leaning cheek to cheek, is meeting noses, there follows a delirious litany of betrayals which have not occurred. For Leontes, however, the unreal things he has seen are everything. Is this nothing? Why, then the world, and all that's in it, is nothing. What's odd is that the neurosis of envisioning an entire world saturated with humiliation is exactly the same when the betrayal is real, and you do see it. Late one night, 14 years ago, outside a small town in East Coast America, I was being driven back to the accommodation block of a theater called Shakespeare and Company, where I was acting minor parts in, among other plays, As You Like It. Driving the car was the sexy, worldly, 24-year-old dancer from Manhattan who I had fallen abjectly in love with. To my green-as-cut grass, 18-year-old self, she seemed incandescent. It was a tentative relationship, but I was concussed with infatuation. In the play, she had the small role of Audrey, a country girl who is seduced away from her devoted simpleton boyfriend, William. The seducer, one of Shakespeare's best wits, is the fast-talking, cynical clown, Touchstone. I had the walk-on part of William. In the back of the car was the bald, wisecracking 40-year-old New Yorker playing Touchstone. He was fun, and I liked drinking with him. But this was Theaterland, and a cliché was begging to be fulfilled. I got out of the car and hurried upstairs to my room. We had rehearsals early in the morning, and we'd all see each other then. Getting into bed, I reached for my cigarettes. They weren't there. I must have dropped them on the stairs. Retracing my steps, I looked out of a window into the brilliant moonlit Massachusetts night and glimpsed an image that punched my natural lights out and made me see stars which weren't the ones in the sky. I pressed my face against the glass to take a better look. The car was still there, and its front seat had been pushed back flat. Touchstone, his visible flesh bluish in the moonlight like a corpse's, was having sex with Audrey. In the time that immediately followed this introduction to a world of conspiracy, shame, and consuming jealousy, something peculiar happened to my eyesight. I'd get on stage or go for a walk, and my vision would flicker in black and white. It was like watching a movie with sections filmed intermittently in negative. Briefly, the curiosity of this delusion would take my mind off what was actually happening. The memory of watching Touchstone and Audrey came back to me periodically as my partner, the actress Kerry Fox, was preparing for her role in Patrice Chéreau's new film, Intimacy. Although it doesn't come out until the end of July, Intimacy has already attracted a particular kind of British press attention. I had a good idea this might happen a year and a half ago when I read the script Kerry had been sent for consideration. It was loosely based on Hanif Kureishi's notorious novel of the same name about the breakup of his own relationship. From Qureshi's exercise in self-disclosure, Chéreau had taken a title and a general theme, that of a man spinning free from the obligations of family into an anguished selfishness. More specifically, however, the plotline of the film had been developed from a neat and haunting short story called Nightlight. Here Qureshi describes an encounter which takes place every Wednesday between two people who meet to have sex but never speak to each other. The first draft of intimacy that Kerry received contained directions in elaborate prose, rather than the normal concise idiom of a completed film script. It had been written in French by Chéreau and his screenwriter, Anne-Louise Trividic, then translated into English. Each episode of Wednesday Sex was minutely described, skillfully developing atmosphere and meaning as the story progressed. But the sex scenes now spanned large swaths of text and had little to do with Qureshi's original taut narrative. They were innovations of the screenplay. Kerry wanted to know what I thought. I didn't really know. It was elegantly written, which was a start. Patrice Chéreau is one of the most respected names in French theater, and his films include the extravagant period drama La Reine Margot, which suggested that he also knew how to make proper cinema. Kerry has made a career out of tackling difficult material. Intimacy was unlikely to be as daunting as her first big role, playing the traumatized author Janet Frame in the 1990 New Zealand film An Angel at My Table, for which she worked through some harrowing asylum scenes and pushed her weight up by 1.5 stones. There have been a scattering of sex scenes in the 15 or so films she has made since. On paper, this looked like another interesting challenge. Nevertheless, the sex in the script sounded significantly different from anything Kerry had come across before. One line in particular caught the attention of us both. She sucks him off for a long time. No doubt about it, that was a puzzler. It was just one line in a complex narrative in which the sex was an integral but not dominant part. Still, it made us laugh. How would Chéreau's cinematography trick the audience into believing that one, head bobbing on air in the male lead's lap, nifty handling of a prosthetic organ? The truth was glaring, but took some reckoning with all the same. It wasn't going to be a trick. In fact, this lonely line was a useful indicator that, if Kerry accepted the role, the sex and intimacy would be far more demanding than the normal perfunctory erotic interlude of most mainstream movies. To some indefinable degree, this sex would be real. My first response was just a quick journalistic reflex. The papers will be interested, I thought, and for reasons that'll have little to do with the quality, or otherwise, of the movie. The French press wouldn't care. Standard cultural contrast. If the film got made, that might be a good thing or a bad thing, but Kerry and the male lead, Mark Rylance, would certainly run the risk of being held up to ridicule. In fact, the British Board of Film Censors only relaxed their guidelines on sexual content last year, so the timing ended up being good, and there haven't been daft arguments about how many seconds of film to cut. With one or two particularly silly exceptions, most of the coverage so far has not reflected badly on the actors. And it has been noted, rightly enough, that intimacy marks a shift in taste for English-language cinema. Regardless of the content of the script, the single most important influence on Kerry's decision to work on intimacy was Patrice Chéreau. After their first meeting, Kerry thought she'd never see him again. His English was not great, and mostly he just seemed to be watching her. Patrice is a looming presence in Parisian cultural life, both as an actor and director, with a reputation for having survived a wild life. In person, he is a gentle, cryptic, 56-year-old gay man with the appearance of being kind of crouched in on himself. He has a strange magneticism which makes you want to impress and confide in him simultaneously. When Kerry, to her surprise, met him for the second time, they talked about the sex scenes in exacting detail. He watched Kerry carefully to see how she would respond. She responded by trusting him. She saw a director with a serious purpose who could handle actors. So she took the part of Claire, the Wednesday woman. What happened next, to me, was that I felt an overwhelming urge to blether. I subjected any friends who would listen to a barrage of my personal dilemmas. Most responded by ignoring the requirement for intricate psychoanalytic comment, asking instead, so is she gonna, do it for real? I didn't maintain philosophical equanimity. At a restaurant in Glasgow, a sympathetic gay couple made the mistake of opining, almost in unison, "It's only a bit of sex." I launched into a half-hour tirade about how, although it might be a worthwhile film, and I didn't have a problem, you couldn't just whistle away visceral responses. I rambled on to the embarrassed sound of pudding being scraped off plates. Yet, as Kerry and I talked about it, a sense of adventure emerged. We developed a new solidarity. If jealousy is about watching, or imagining you are watching, an infidelity, then this would be an experiment in controlled jealousy. I met Mark Rylance and felt not the slightest twitch of resentment. Mark has a calm, almost elfin presence. He speaks with the faintly displaced accent of an American who has lived most of his life in England. As an actor, he is unique. Last year, playing Hamlet in London's Globe Theatre, of which he is also the director, he gave the most powerful account of Hamlet's relationship with his father's ghost I have ever seen. As the male lead in Intimacy, he would appear in 90% of the scenes and have to work almost every day of the shoot. He was coming straight out of another job to do it and going straight back into the theater afterwards. The sex scenes would be tougher and physiologically more complex for him than for Kerry. The final question was, would they be having penetrative sex? Logical or not, that was the impassable barrier for me and for Kerry also. If they did, it wouldn't be the first time it has happened in a mainstream movie. There are stories about actors in a relationship having real sex for the standard type erotic interlude, without the crew even realizing. Unknowingly, you may have seen a film where this happens, but that is decisively not what happens in Intimacy. There is oral sex which you see, and there is the extremely effective illusion of two ordinary people making desperate love, but that's all it ultimately is, an illusion. So why, if it's an illusion, the need to go as far as the film does? Why the need to show real oral sex, even if only briefly? And why the need to show more often Mark with an erection? The answer is simple. It is to take the internal logic of a work of art to a conclusion. That is its integrity. In this case, it is to take a story that deals with sex as far as the actors can allow, without compromising their personal lives, and to elicit from them the most powerful performances of which they are capable. Patrice Chéreau does not mess about. He is the best kind of theater-turned-film director. At ease with the technicalities of cinema, his most intense concentration is devoted to actors, and he knows that an actor working at full pitch operates with the substance of his or her own life. We now live with a very confused entertainment culture, which wildly overstates the importance of movie stars, transforming every weekend supplement into a marketing arm for Hollywood. By the same token, though, the actual job which those actors do is downplayed to a negligible minimum. It sounds almost pretentious to talk about serious movie actors as opposed to celebrities, but they do exist. And this is an example of what they do when prepared to take a risk with the material of life. There's another, subtler reason for the oral sex in Intimacy. Although brief, it completes the illusion for the audience. Because we can see this thing happening, we are allowed to feel that everything is. References to it in the press have been amusing for the purse-lipped literalness it has produced. Fox takes Rylance's penis in her mouth, squeaked the Sydney Morning Herald after she won the Silver Bear for Best Actress at this year's Berlin Film Festival. Blowjob is the affectedly relaxed demotic deployed by columnists. To my mind, a blowjob represents the mechanical, bobbing up and down motion you get in porn films. What Kerry does in Intimacy is not as formal as that. Her movements are gentle and humane. We're not used to it. We don't see much sex in Britain. In fact, strangely enough, we see very little realistic sex at all. We see lots of sexually charged advertising images, a huge amount of semi-pornographic magazine representations, some desultory stuff on television, but almost no truthful images of it at all. Intimacy is irrelevant to debates about pornography. It doesn't blur the line between art house movie and top-shelf video. It makes it clearer. 9/10 of the appeal of pornography is due to the indecent feelings concerning sex which moralists inculcate in the young, Bertrand Russell wrote in 1929. The other 10th is physiological. The sex in Intimacy looks real, it is achieved beautifully, but it is not particularly erotic. It is the fumbling of two bodies craving one another. When it turns nasty, as it does one Black Wednesday, it is frightening without even resorting to explicit rape. It will do absolutely nothing for what Julie Burchill, in full command of her distasteful lexicon, recently called the po-faced, seat-sniffing desperation of the public masturbator. Intimacy doesn't even have Russell's 1/10 of physiological appeal. It's about what Norman Mailer called the dark, gritty business of sex. Should someone find themselves turned on by the film, that would be odd, though not aberrant. But if the emotional complexity of a real or realistically conveyed human relationship inspires equally indecent feelings as watching the bumpity-bump burlesque of hardcore pornography, then you have a problem which no degree of censorship will solve. Paul Thomas Anderson's 1997 film Boogie Nights was about the booming of the California porn industry in the 1970s. It showed no sex, and the logic of the film suffered because of it. Almost as an excuse, it revealed a final image of the actor Mark Wahlberg wearing a hilariously long prosthetic penis. It was as if the film were confessing that it was a mainstream story about the sex industry that could show nothing substantial of what the sex industry actually does. It was like a war film without battles. Boogie Nights showed you the weapon of the sex industry and left its use to your imagination. Not showing things in films can sometimes produce potent suggestivity. In The Big Sleep, there's no mistaking the erotic heat in the dialogue between Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. You know they sleep together, and the director, Howard Hawks, stretched the moral conventions of his time to create an intense atmosphere of innuendo. He benefited from not being allowed to show them do it. But, as a general principle, not showing something runs counter to the instinct of cinema. It should be no surprise that violence and sex are its continuing obsessions. These are events which, as they occur in life, are fast, fleeting, and blurred. If we are involved with them, we have no visual distance. We see confused images. The whole purpose of a movie camera is be our voyeuristic eye, and whatever its aspirations to high seriousness or low frivolity, to magnify and let us see in art what we can't in life. When I asked Kerry why she wanted to take a chance on the kind of sex Patrice was portraying in Intimacy, she said, "First, because I've never seen it done before." For me, the reasoning was much the same. There would have been a point of no return if Patrice had asked Kerry and Mark to perform penetrative sex. But, perhaps uniquely, I was being offered a safe emotional laboratory with parameters I understood, in which I would find out how far the elastic of my trust would stretch. Like a movie camera, jealousy is a voyeuristic eye. It desires to find out how much can be seen before the picture breaks up into misery. I would be the passive, observing male of intimacy, and I felt, deeply, that the active female in this scenario was strong enough and wise enough to be trusted. "It's showing the growth of a relationship," said Kerry. "It's portraying it through pictures, and showing the growth of a relationship physically is what cinema is about." When shooting for Intimacy began, the strains on Kerry became apparent. The entire story of the film takes the characters on a descending emotional spiral, and the nadir for Claire, the Wednesday woman, occurs when she confesses to Betty, played by Marianne Faithfull, that her whole life has been nothing more than a talentless dabbling. But there is no question that the sex scenes, concentrated into a single week of filming, were the most demanding. She described it as exhaustively plodding your way through scene work. The floor was hard, giving her carpet burns. She would come home exhausted and almost ill. Patrice had agreed to make it safer than just a closed set. When a scene ended, the crew were not allowed to rush in and rearrange things. Kerry and Mark needed time gradually to pull themselves out of a punishing experience. Much of Intimacy is shot handheld, but during the sex, the camera was stationary. Both actors knew which parts of their bodies were being looked at. Nevertheless, Kerry realized that Mark had further to go to accept his nakedness. Actresses have been cultivated in the industry to undress and are better used to it. Kerry said she felt protective of Mark because, between him and Patrice, there was the tension of males pushing each other to an extreme. Then, there was the matter of displaying physical arousal in front of a cameraman. For Mark, the most difficult scene was what Patrice called the beautiful Wednesday, in which Kerry takes him in her mouth. Kerry's toughest moment came on Black Wednesday, when Mark, albeit ambiguously, rapes her. For me, by this stage, the dominant anxiety had become more simplistic. Would the film justify Kerry's work? Would intimacy be any good? At the time, 2 French films were being released in Britain thanks to the relaxing of BBFC guidelines. I never saw Baise-Moi, but Catherine Breillat's Romance was perhaps the ugliest, clumsiest, most pretentious and revolting movie I have seen. It used an Italian porn star to penetrate the pathetic-looking lead actress, merely to show that it was being done. The film was a kind of comfort. Knowing a little about Patrice, I knew intimacy would at least be better than romance. The first time I saw Intimacy, it was with an audience that consisted only of Patrice, Kerry, Mark, Hanif Kureishi, and Timothy Spall, who was playing Kerry's cuckolded husband in the film. It was an overwhelming and inspiring relief. Intimacy had originally been due to receive both British and French funding and might have been granted a major budget. At the last moment, the British money vanished. Although made for less than Patrice had hoped, it was stunningly shot. The film moved with gripping intensity. Dirty London had never, I felt, been portrayed as honestly and luminously as this. There was a sublime ugliness to the film. As Timothy Spall said afterwards, with a signature twisted grin, it even makes New Cross look beautiful. That, however, was the beautiful screening. Later at a press event, I would have to confront the black screening. In a small theater in Soho, I sat surrounded by critics, my own editor, PR reps, and an elderly New Zealander, Kerry's mother, Margaret. Never let anyone persuade you that a film is the same film whoever the audience is. In this cramped, nervous atmosphere, I saw faults that hadn't been there before. I wasn't convinced by a subplot. The tone wasn't always right. As my editor, David, said afterwards, that was French discourse put in the mouths of Londoners. The film is an utterly unironic journey through personal anguish, leavened by only 2 good jokes. Well, that was nothing to worry about, Margaret said afterwards. But this was the kind of intelligent, yearning, serious material that can bore British audiences. For a moment, a nausea of jealousy gripped me. What were these people looking at my woman for? What if they don't think the sex scenes are necessary? There are only 2 films I know with sexual content equal to that of Intimacies. There is the extraordinary effect of the editing in Don't Look Now that reveals Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie intermittently making love and putting their clothes on. It is an unforgettable analogy for the temporal disturbances in the rest of the film. I No Corrida, the Japanese erotic classic, shows a couple having sex from beginning to end. It has an amazing stylized precision, which delicately distances the audience from the degeneration of a sexual obsession. In many ways, however, Last Tango in Paris is the closest parallel to Intimacy. There is a strikingly similar fascination with anonymity. Just as Mark and Kerry hardly speak during the Wednesdays of Intimacy, so Marlon Brando refuses to let Maria Schneider tell him her name. It's beautiful without knowing anything, says Schneider's character. But, despite the fact that people seem to remember it as sexually explicit, you see surprisingly little. Last Tango in Paris was a film of its time. Most of what you see is of the woman, Maria Schneider, naked. In Intimacy, both partners are more or less equally revealed. I think Patrice Chéreau has made a rare film. It shows ordinary human lovemaking, catching its roughness and darkness, but also finding in it a thing of beauty. In fact, the one thing I am absolutely certain of is that the sex scenes are some of the most brilliantly executed aspects of Intimacy. If anything, it is a question not of whether the film is justified in including them, but whether the rest of the film lives up to the sex scenes. Even during my dark screening, I was moved. I knew the Kerry who was on screen, yet she was also someone else. To do it, she says, she had to tap random different memories to come by her performance. Watching her, I felt a rush of past confusions and abandonments. Drama is there for you to feel sympathy with others, Kerry explains. People can see they're not alone in the world. You don't have to be worried that you're the only one. Once I had seen the film, both beautiful and black versions, the jealous urge to find out how far Kerry and I could trust each other disappeared. Everything did change. We now have a small son, and that speaks for itself. When I try and explain to myself what I like about Kerry, I think of an odd talent she has. A New Zealander, She has lived in London for only 6 years, yet she knows her way around the city better than most natives. I came back to London from Scotland. It is with a foreigner's awe that I sit in a car as she drives, in possession of a mysterious clarity of mind through this loneliest and most labyrinthine of capitals. Drivers of black cabs don't get better than this. I am not kidding. This woman has a kind of occult knowledge. 14 years ago, driving that car with Touchstone in the back, Audrey taught me a tough lesson. I obviously learned it well. Now, even if I were fleeing the jaws of hell and it was Friday afternoon rush hour in London, I've got a driver I'd trust to find the highway. The inferno receding and special effects blazing, this is a movie in full Technicolor, all 24 frames per second flashing positive. Twitchy camera, movements, and a preference for doorways and rumpled bedrooms as a backdrop to conversation outside the flat. The busy thoroughfares of Peckham and New Cross accentuate the work-a-day atmosphere and suggest the urban anonymity that both enlivens and isolates the couple's intimacy when together. Jay and Claire barely exchange a word. "I don't have the impression of being with anyone," he says of her. It's the same emotional dislocation that characterized the lovers of Last Tango in Paris nearly 30 years ago. No names, no personal disclosures, no comment. Intimacy will have nothing like the same impact as Bertolucci's film. The whole climate was different back in 1972, and Brando was in his last phase as a great actor. Realism, with the terror of actual experience still alive on the screen, was how Pauline Kael described the achievement of that film. It's roughly what Chéreau is after here, and once or twice he gets it. A flashback shows Jay abandoning his wife and family for good, packing up his gear like a thief in the night. But before he goes, he masturbates in the bathroom, then has a quiet little chat with his 6-year-old son. We get the idea that these are the memories that will haunt him. What derails the pair's secret liaison, and the film with it, is Jay's decision to break the spell of anonymity and delve into Cla's life. He starts following her and discovers things he would perhaps rather not have known. For one thing, she's an Amram regular in a pup theater. For another, she is married to Andy Timothy Spa, a loquacious cabbie with chaotic teeth and an inability to smell a rat at 5. Pace's Jay becomes a pool room companion to this cucked, a promisingly nasty development on which the script dismally fails to capitalize. There just isn't enough emotional or intellectual substance to sustain the intrigue. Nor does it help that Chéreau and Kerry write dialogue that no human being in the fine world would ever utter on the periphery. We get disjointed sallies from Jay's friends, whether the drug adult sad back Alastair Galbraith, who shouts and sweats a lot, or the gay French barman Philippe Calvario, who fancies himself as a philosopher. Even less comprehensible is Marianne Faithfull in the role of Claire's confidant, who serves up bag lady gibberish by the square yard. Visually, this movie offers something truthful in its portrait of erotic passion and certain details, the raining bloom on Carrie Fox's face, the scar, bisecting Mark Ryland's eyebrow, may even outlast the more controversial images of carnality as an account of spiritual estrangement, however, or the failure of love, or the precarious state of modern marriage, or whatever else it thinks it is. You're not missing a great deal. Every Wednesday afternoon, Claire Carr Fox knocks on Jay's Mark Ryland door, exchange discordant gazes before throwing their clothes to the ground. Jay's grubby London flat is the setting for their fiery sex play. And like animals, these figures claw their way toward each other from opposite sides of the room. CLA exits, leaving Jay in silent comfort, and the primal ecstasy they seem to get from this physical love becomes the unspoken promise of her return. Not since Last Tango in Paris has a film so ravishingly explored the many fine connections between desire, physical intimacy, and romance. It doesn't matter where CLA came from or where she met Jay, because the genius of Patrice Chéreau's intimacy is its unspoken. A series of flashbacks reveal Jay growing apart from his wife, his now grimy apartment once alive with the laughter of his young boys. Because his wife refused to touch, he cries during masturbation. But in the ghostly CLA, Jay seems to have found salvation. His mistake, though, is that he falls in love with her and seeks something more than just her touch. Following her home one day, Jay learns too much where she lives, where she works, whom she's married to. It's like we owe it to each other. He says, seeking to shatter unspoken rules. She's an actress in a dingy production of Tennessee Williams's The Glass Menagerie, and her husband Andy Timothy Spa drinks and plays pool at the bar that hosts the play. Jay begins to manipulate Andy as if trying to break the couple up. But Chéreau is mindful of everyone's pain and mistakes, including Andy's. This makes Intimacy, an unusually complex film to the director. Sex-like theater becomes something akin to performance art when Andy tells Claire that she'll never be an actress. It's his way of telling his wife that she has failed to keep her performance with Jay a secret. Rylance, in a remarkable performance, truly evokes the horrifying pain of bleeding for someone and getting nothing in return. Intimacy's truths are remarkably universal. So painful yet so sexy in Chéreau's hands. Extra information, like one of its two major characters, the drama Intimacy, would like to start up a rather involved discussion. But unfortunately, the sex keeps getting in the way. And let's set something straight in a hurry. The sex scenes in this downbeat character piece are as graphic as any that have ever been seen in legitimate cinema. In fact, it's debatable whether all of the sexual contact between Char actors in this film can be called simulated, which explains why it was banned in at least one European country. Consequently, the film has been released by its distributor without an MPA rating, which means that nothing has been left out for its current U.S. theatrical run. To be fair to the film, it should be noted that there seems to be a point to the explicit content. It's evidently intended to show a more realistic, less glamorous version of an adulterous relationship. However, as valid that point might be, there's no reason for filmmaker Patrice Chéreau to go quite so far, and unfortunately, the sexual content diverts attention away from what is some very powerful acting by. The film's talented cast, Intimacy, is a somewhat ironic title, though. Divorced bartender J. Mark Rylance is having an affair with married CLA Kerry Fox. It's under what is possibly the least intimate of circumstances the two of them begin meeting weekly in his fairly grungy apartment, but have little interaction with each other. Aside from sex, that's fine with Claire, who's not looking for anything more than a purely physical relationship. But it's a bit disturbing to Jay, so he begins following her around town in an attempt to get to know her better, despite the fact that such a move could anger CLA and cause her to discontinue their affair in the film's second half. Chéreau and co-screenwriter Anne-Louise Trividic attempt to flesh out, so to speak, the story with subplots about one of Jay's friends and one of his co-workers, as well as Claire's husband, British character actor Timothy Spa. But all it does is show how much better the film might have been if it hadn't focused so much on the tawdry sexual relationship. Still, there's no denying how strong the performances are by Fox, and especially Rylance, who deserves credit for taking on such a bold role. The less prescriptive, far more liberal outlook of the British Board of Film Classification is blatantly clear in any number of graphic sex scenes, but it has taken a Frenchman director Patrice Chéreau, Lorraine Margot, to cause the BBFC to consider leaving an oral sex sequence intact, which they have, yet this is no porn outing with pneumatic periton, always aided babes and unflagging studs, but an intense film whose real sex in all its awkwardness, hesitancy, and bluntness indicates the bumpiness of a vlog. Relationship between Jay, a bar manager who has walked out on his family, and Claire, an unfulfilled housewife, and amateur actor who is cheating on her husband. Both are groping towards some kind of contentment when they meet on Wednesdays for sex, but happiness never happens, so as to render their sweaty encounters as until as possible. Chéreau never uses attractive lens filters, slick camera moves, or exciting editing, and so the ill-at-ease relationship of this inarticulate couple comes through all the more powerfully. This is also due to two full-textured performances from Mark Rylance and Kerry Fox, who are such good actors that they convey pain or loss with the smallest twitch of a mouth or the briefest glance. The only real mistake the director makes is to ram home his themes and ideas through them all. Self-conscious remarks of Jay's colleague and the overheated prattle of Claire's chatty husband, Timothy Spa. He should have trusted in the couple's significant silences and the sex. This film, directed by Patricio, screenplay by Anne-Louise Trividic Patricio, produced by Patrick Cassavetti, Jacques Hinstin, starring Kerry Fox, Mark Rylance, Tim Spa, Philip Calvario, Alastair Galb, Marianne Faithfull, cinematography, edited by Frenois Gagier, Music by Eric Nevu. Production companies: TMA Studio, Canal, Arte France, Cinéma France 2 Cinema, Y Mikado Film, Azor Films, distributed by France Path Distribution. United Kingdom, Proino Film, Very Germany, Mikado Film, Italy. Release dates: January 20th, 2001 in Sundance, March 28th, 2001 in France, May 4th, 2001 in Italy, June 7th, 2001 in Germany, July 27th, 2001 in United Kingdom. Running time: 107 minutes, 119 minutes. France countries: France, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy. Language: English. Box office: 2.7 million. So guys, this is the review of Intimacy movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.